Welcome everyone, happy Tuesday. Thank you all for joining us. Today we're going to be talking through how we can help you deliver an enterprise-ready test automation strategy. As always, feel free to leave any questions that you have in the Q&A function in the Zoom, and we'll get to those towards the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'll jump into our introductions here. My name is Michael Daly, Director of Technical Product Marketing here at Provar. Been with the company here for about 5 years now. And I'm joined today by Nicki Bang-Madsen from Alm Brand Group, who is a lead test engineer. Today, we have a variety of topics that we're going to be covering. So I'll briefly go over the agenda. Today, we're going to be talking through kind of the intro to the journey between the partnership of Provar and Alm Brand Group and where that all began. And also some of the challenges that were involved in testing a multi-system environment in the insurance industry. Then we'll talk through what the perspective was about shifting to being not just a Salesforce tested solution, but also an enterprise testing solution. Then we'll talk through some of the results and kind of what the future held for Alm Brand. So what the reusability, the reducing testing time, and the standardization of all their testing practices across the company, kind of what that process looked like. And then we'll go into the partnership and talk through some of the collaboration elements between Provar and Alm Brand and what the future holds. So exciting stuff. Without further ado, I'll kick it off to Nicki, who's going to give us an introduction here.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for having me on board today. Hello, everybody. Nicki Bang-Madsen, lead test engineering at Alm Brand Group. Alm Brand Group is the second largest insurance company in Denmark with a history of 230 years, so quite an old company as well. Was also one of the first companies in the financial sector to go on with using Salesforce in 2014, if I remember correctly. And 6 years ago, we kind of went into that perspective that we wanted to have the same quality in our IT deliveries as we had in our products we was delivering to our customers. So one of the things we was looking into was that how we could find a proper solution that would solve the issue we was facing about running with modern IT and an old company. So
yeah, thank you so much for that background, Nicki. So can you begin by telling us kind of what the journey began like with test automation and Provar? What was the kind of the origin story, if you will, of Alm Brand and test automation?
Yes, 6 years ago, we started looking at a proper test automation solution for Salesforce since we was moving from Classic to Lightning. We was running 14-day sprints, so it was quite a heavy amount of releases we had a year, and each release was costing 86 hours. After, I think, 4 months into running different POCs on different tools, we was meeting up with some guys from Provar and having a really good discussion about how we could implement this. So we ran with a POC, and already after the first month, we were managed to see that we could reduce the first amount of test cases from our manual regression test. And after 6 months, we could see that we was able to reduce it by 90%. It was quite impressive to see how quickly and how easy it was to maintain the solution. But also that about having so high attention to the implementation and the architecture, how much we could maximize the reusability and the maintainability, remove the part of that, so that we could see by putting into fragments and maximize the usage of Provar, we could spend way more time developing our solutions and less time fixing all the bugs we saw in production. Since after the first year, we could monitor and see that we reduced it by 60%, which was quite impressive. One of the things we also saw was that even though we have been using it for 6 years now, and we went from having 3 Salesforce teams to 6 Salesforce teams, that we was able to maintain the solution without we had to hire a lot of extra technical testers. We was not falling into all of the typical pitfalls working with test automation. And at the same time, we could also see that we still managed to reduce the amount of time spending on test automation and the amount of bugs we're getting into production compared to all the areas where we didn't have the same amount of test automation.
So when you're looking at what you accomplished in just testing Salesforce itself, how did you begin looking into, okay, let's take what we've done here with Salesforce and apply that to all of our other systems? So we're looking at this, right? There's a gambit of different workflows and integrations that are involved in your industry. So kind of talk me through that process.
Yeah, we was, first of all, again, our history, we was acquiring another insurance company 2 years ago. So we had to work into getting those two companies into the same IT stack. At the same time, we had a lot of different processes that was extremely complex inside of the insurance sector that we also had to understand how can we test this. So we had to understand how can we implement proper test automation on all the areas, just like we did on the Salesforce platform 5 years ago. And one of the things we saw was that a scenario we had last year where we had to spend around 2,000 hours on manual testing, that we already in the process, because I became pretty bored about doing the same test over and over again, that I could take some of the old legacy systems, building ADF, do proper test automation on it, start use the database plugin you also got delivered by Provar to maximize the efficiency of the test and optimize the verification even further. That became kind of the kickstart of a smoke test in that process. And suddenly we could see that we could just build on and build on and build on. Then we also understood, okay, now we soon have to make a decision if we should continue this direction, should we find another? But when we was looking into it, we saw by using Provar for all of the platforms, we could both increase the scalability across the organization, because suddenly everybody will have the same understanding of the tool. They will also have the same understanding of the architecture, the implementation process, how to build a proper test case inside of the tool, and so on. We also saw the cost, how cost effective it was, that instead of going with 2 or 3 licenses for all the tools that was best in class on the different platforms, we could use the same tool with just more licenses, which also put us in a better negotiation place and say, okay, can you give us an offer that is better for those amount of licenses? Apart from that, it was also easier to see that we could use the same kind of process and the architecture no matter where we was looking of the platforms. So we basically just increased it by a level to say that Salesforce became a level in the enterprise instead of just having focus on the Salesforce platform. So that was quite interesting to see how quickly and how much it became a no-brainer for us to move into that direction.
All right, so thank you for kind of talking us through that thought process there and kind of your decision process and how you decided to go about that. Can you talk us through a little bit more? So when we're looking at the traditional method, right, you do everything in the UI from setup to teardown to verification. What was that process like in migrating all of these UI processes to be more of API database actions and things like that?
Yes, you can say that. When we started to implement this solution, it kind of was the first couple of months back in time when we was implementing the Salesforce solution that we understood the more we could move down, the easier it was to maintain, and the more stable the test case was. We could optimize and make it more reliable. And at the same time, we could also see that we could reduce the amount of time in the test execution by 80% by moving both the setup, the verification, the teardown, all to the API level in the Salesforce spectrum. When we were starting last year on moving it to an enterprise level, we could actually see that we could take the exact same scenario where we could take a case with where they had to go find the customer in the backend, they had to do something in Postman, then they had to verify those two Mavens together. Mm-hmm. All of that could be done in the same test case in Provar, where we could use the direct database connection, find the customer, execute it in the API level, verify it in the database towards the API level, and see that how quick we could execute the test. Suddenly we could see that we could just take the exact same kind of standard we used for the test case on Salesforce and move it one-to-one with all the other platforms we was using. So we could also start even to go that level up and say, okay, can we monitor this to see, okay, what is the quickest way to go? Is that by making a select in Salesforce or making it in our database? Mm-hmm. So suddenly you could even make your test case even more monitored and even more enhanced And we could see that we could reduce all our testing and maintainability on it by quite some heavy numbers already in the first couple of months. So that was just making it even a more big no-brainer to go into this direction.
Right. And so when you're thinking about testing all of these complex systems and integrations, of course, you have Salesforce as the centerpiece of all of this. How do you go about testing each of these individual components, and what does that process look like from a Provar perspective?
I think what was the quite interesting fact is that some time ago I had a discussion where we discussed, okay, how can we find a proper way of doing test automation on the different levels in the company? And from my perspective, by far Salesforce is the hardest part to do proper test automation on, because everything is generic and everything is running new all the time. And there's a lot of things that's out of your control, basically. So by doing this, we could take the best in class in Salesforce, use the same system to test the ADF application or the more modern CMS system. And also when we was talking into email testing, we are doing tons of emails. So that is quite an important part of our business. So we was suddenly able to do testing of all the data streams. We could use the same variable inside of a test to test our CMS system and verify it towards our database, or do something in Salesforce or verify it through the integration to see that the data stream was always as expected. So suddenly we had a way better control of our data stream compared to what we ever had in the company. And we was able to do all of it inside of the same system. So that was also a way of optimizing both our workflow, but also the way we were working with our data to see how can we fit all of this into a test case without having to go through 5 different platforms in different manual test cases.
Right. And so you've talked us through kind of the journey, the beginning stages, your implementation, your decision around expanding automation beyond just Salesforce capabilities and testing. If we look back at this is the beginning, right? This is where it all began as far as the ROI with Provar and Salesforce specifically. What did that start at like, and how did that shift into the more enterprise testing solution? What did you see as far as your returns and your time savings and things like that?
I think what is quite interesting with this is that we can see how much we can repeat of the same story. The only difference is that today we got a way better knowledge of the tool and what direction we want to go in compared to those numbers we had the first time. So that we was realizing was that back in time when we managed to deliver those numbers after the first 6 months, that was coming into it with no knowledge about how Provar was. Mm-hmm. So that itself was quite an achievement. What we also realized is that moving it up to an enterprise solution will even perhaps just empower it more, and that about we could start building pieces. No matter what platform or team you were sitting in, you could contribute to the same test cases around by using small pieces or fragments that could be reused across of all the test cases. So the results we saw after the first month when we was moving to the enterprise level was that we could see we had a case where they were spending 58 hours on manual testing. After the first couple of months, we managed to deliver from 58 hours to 7 minutes. That was the scenario we spoke about before when we was talking into this about go into the database, find the correct customer, go to the postman, execute the test, and then verify all of the results. That itself is quite a process when you have to do it for all our products. But by doing it with Provar and running all the test cases in parallel execution, we were able to also just minimize the effort and maximize the value. So that was quite an achievement we made the first month.
Yeah, those are some pretty impressive statistics, just looking at the 1 month returns there. And obviously we're looking now into more of the future, right? So when we think about kind of what the future holds, we'll get into talking more about the partnership, but I'm curious, what is beyond just yourself, what is kind of the internal reactions been to automation and kind of the rollout internally?
I think looking from the reactions we got internally have been quite massive. Of course, the persons who spent the 58 hours on manual testing have been extremely pleased because suddenly they can use that time on the more complex testing scenarios, but also the more business-driven testing from that point of view. Even more, what we have realized is that when they saw how massive the result was, they started themselves to actually investigate how to learn Provar. What I mean is quite a step ahead. And also that we had our student apprentice who only works 2 days a week and was able to already deliver value after 9 working days. After 9 working days, she started to deliver test automation scripts.
Wow.
And could be running on her own. This alone have been quite some massive results of building a good strategy, building a really good architecture inside of it, and then just rolling on from there. Also, when we look into what the CPO have said, this CPO is quite a well-known guy in the Salesforce spectrum and have seen quite a lot. And hearing all the responses we are getting internally about how massive the impact is when running test automation properly have just been making it even more satisfied to work with, to be honest. So I think that have been quite some statements we have came with along this.
Yeah, I think what stands out the most here to me is the 12 years of manually testing all these individual aspects and components that you mentioned previously. I can imagine the amount of time that was poured into that and the amount of time that you're now able to get back and not just do other things, but more critical and complex testing activities that you need to do manually, right?
Yeah, I also think one of the things that stands out about that scenario is that one of the key factors was that they was able to move from static test data where they was relying on a specific number of customers they could use. If anybody changed those customers, they have to wait for a refresh of the customers to get the correct data back. Suddenly, we could shift this so that it was a more generic test automation, where we could base it on criteria instead of static test data. So that was also an enhancement we got out of automating it.
Right. And so when we're shifting into more around the partnership between Alm Brand and Provar, can you kind of go into some detail? How did that begin and what does that journey look like from your perspective?
I think, first of all, when we started to take this decision about going and use Provar as an enterprise tool, we made an agreement with Provar about meeting up for the first on-site meeting about how we could move from a vendor-client-based relationship into a more partnership, where the first point we had was the onboarding, because no matter how good tool we can get, if the onboarding is not easy, it will make it a lot harder to actually get the correct resources on board for it. So the first point of this was onboarding, where we said we would like to somehow see could we even use their platform to build a course. And already after the first month, we managed to deliver this amazing course built in collaboration by Provar and Alm Brand Group. One of the things I really like about it is that we can use the platform to become more customer-centric based with content we deliver, and that we can deliver content that both tells our users about our testing strategy, our test automation strategy, and how even going down to how we want to deploy in our pipelines and so on. All of this on the Provar University, specifically for our users. So that was the first mile we wanted to go and say, okay, if we can achieve that, what should be the next? So then we was looking into the database testing, the i2x, where now we spoke about CMS platforms on the first page. And with the CMS platforms, everything is component-based. So for that, we're already running a POC on the i2x, where we think it's making a perfect fit, moving from using the page objects to going into more component-based locators. So already there we have seen some quite good results. And another thing was that about parallel execution. We are running in this migration right now between moving from GitLab to GitHub. And one of the stories I like to tell is that when I was presenting for the managing partners and saying, this is how we want to do test automation. Meanwhile, in those 30 minutes I was presenting for them, I turned my screen around and showed them that I had ran the entire regression test for my team at that point. So that was quite an interesting journey to see that their reaction, that I could present and at the same time run 6 executions in parallel. So that was quite insane what we managed to achieve for that. And at the same time, what we are looking for the future when looking into Provar Grid and so on. Another part is that about the collaboration between Provar and Alm Brand, is that when we speak about our ambitions, we speak about what we want to achieve, the feeling we are getting back about how much Provar is investing themselves into making a tool that is a lot more built on the client's needs than just what they think is the best. Because one of the reasons I think it was also so easy to go with Provar is that the satisfaction about working with a tool that is not making you feel like you have to adapt to the tool, but the tool is actually adapting to your needs and making the tool more and more fun to work with over time. And seeing that when you actually come with something, they react. And it's not reacting in 14 days of a year. It's the same day you're getting a proper response. So one of the things we made of decisions on our workshop with Provar was that we would have those 4 quarterly sessions, learning about new features, telling about problems we was facing in our end and how we could perhaps find a common solution to solve those issues. Another thing was the annual workshop where we would meet on site and let the developers from Provar speak directly with our test automation engineers to get an even better understanding and relationship towards each other to work even further and optimize our work. The last thing was how to build up a direct communication line through Slack at some point where we want to be able to come with the feature requests, discuss them, and actually understand each other's way of working even better so that we at some point can come to deliver the best possible solution for both parties. And what also will help a lot of other customers in that sense.
So in terms of the partnership and kind of your key takeaways outside of the onboarding course for your internal teams, what's another thing that you can point to that's been a big benefit to this?
I think pointing towards what is the big benefit is also the way we can see that we are able to just scale. We are able to scale on the platforms. We are able to scale up and down on the different platforms we're working on when we are talking into resources. Another thing is that when we are seeing that the impact we are getting and how quick we can react to all of the errors we normally will have, and how quickly we can actually embed this into our ways of working when we are talking with the developers. That is perhaps some of the biggest benefits. You can see how easy we can implement this, and not just for our regression test perspective, but also for the development phase, where the result you saw before with 99% was built in the meanwhile of the development phase. And because it was quite a major risk and quite a major important process we had to implement, that about we could be able to deploy like 6 to 8 times a day instead of once a week. Wow. Made a massive change in the development phase.
Yeah. So, and again, just kind of looking at this as a journey, right? So we saw the beginning, we saw how it all began, the origin story between Alm Brand and automation and Provar. You talked me through kind of the decision processes that were involved, the testing of multiple systems, expanding it to be more enterprise-wide, and some of the benefits that you saw there. But as we're looking at this, right, everyone looks to that end goal, and you see that as being very hard to obtain, right? In the industry, true end-to-end automation is something that is very difficult kind of implement, and it is a journey. What would you say to anyone who's at the beginning stages of this, or even in the middle of this process right now, as kind of your piece of advice from what you've seen?
I think it's both about what I just mentioned. It's about finding a tool where, again, you don't have to adapt to the tool. You can make the tool adapt to your processes slowly. And that about the initial investment you're doing when you're making your decision, about not expecting to, okay, we have to deliver 100 test cases over the first half year. It's more about the strategy, the architecture, and so on when you start up your process than what you deliver in the end. Because with a correct architecture, a good structure in your test, a good implementation strategy, it will not face all of those risks with normal test automation projects you face normally, because you can avoid most of them by doing it properly in the start of the process.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Nicki. Thank you for walking us through that journey and all the information that you shared. It's been pretty, I know from my side, I've definitely enjoyed this partnership that we have together between our two companies, and excited to see what the future holds as well. So as far as our webinar goes, that concludes the kind of the primary content that we're going to be presenting for you all today. As I said in the beginning, however, there is a Q&A. So if you'd like to stick around for that, feel free to submit a question in the Q&A box and we will get to it. So we've already had a few questions come in here, and I'll kind of go through some of those. We had someone who had to drop off, but they were asking around Provar Automation training for Salesforce for an individual. And I would say that University of Provar is a great place to start with that. So you can just go to provar.me and you can begin learning. Hundreds of courses are available for free there. All the content is free. So you can get certifications in Provar Automation, Provar Manager, and all those good things there. So that would be my suggestion. We had another question around Salesforce.com integration with SAP systems, and will Provar automate SAP from an end-to-end perspective? So, Nicki, I wasn't sure if you are utilizing SAP internally.
No, we are not using SAP in our scenario. So that is a question for you, Michael.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I think the short answer is yes. Provar can automate any web application and any application that has either an API or a database component to it. We can hook those into an end-to-end test. And you saw on the diagram previously that we were showing as Salesforce being the center component. You can test all of these as part of the same flow. So that's the big value add here when we're talking about end-to-end automation. We're talking about the ability to test your Salesforce integrations as part of the same test case. This looks like it's a question for you, Nicki. What system do you utilize for concurrent testing? So I think that's around the parallelization aspect.
Until now, we have been using GitLab and executing it on there to and Docker containers. So that has been the way we have been working until now. Now we are moving towards GitHub Enterprise, where I expect we will be using GitHub Actions, or perhaps even using Azure, depending on what direction the DevOps team wants to go for that perspective.
Sounds good.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. This is another one for you, Nicki. Great to hear your story. Did you have any pushback from implementing Provar? If so, how did you handle it? This is a great question.
It's that could be a really, really long explanation. Back in days when we were starting on Salesforce, it was quite hard because you had some departments in the company didn't have the same attention to test automation like we had on Salesforce. So that's why we became kind of the front runners on it. Another thing was the developers, the testers, even the other testers at some point, perhaps found they was disagreeing on some of the things. But coming back to it, what we saw was that we was two people with doing test automation on the Salesforce platform. and yet we still managed to hit the numbers of 90% in the first 6 months. And I think it was more like a phase where people had to actually realize what you are gaining from test automation instead of what is the cost. Because it's not only about what you can save in money and so on and in time, it's also about what kind of quality of product you're delivering to your client.
Yeah, that's a
So
great
there's
point.
a lot of different perspectives you can utilize to speak into why using the proper test automation like Provar. So now where we move to the enterprise version, it became again a discussion because it's a change, and when there's coming a change, it's not everybody who likes it. But I really think everybody is supporting it in Alm Brand and is just really, really enjoying the journey right now.
It's hard to argue with the results, right?
It is really hard to argue with the results, but also that when you have seen the results on one platform, you also like to be a part of the journey. So it was helping it a lot.
Yeah, good stuff. Had another question come in for you, Nicki. The question is, how do you approach end-to-end processes? For example, customer onboarding. Did you do it in small bits, like verifying all combinations of a name, verifying all combinations of address, or did you do multiples of name, address, name, address?
You can say we have done multiple test cases of testing different variants of test cases. Now we had this specific scenario around where we had to test all the products was delivered correctly in the correct format and so on. And I think what our approach have shown us is that you can do both of the things. In some scenarios, you can do the one where you're testing smaller bits when it's more platform specific test. Where when you're doing those end-to-end scenarios, we don't want to test everything in the end-to-end scenario. Some of it we will keep for the smaller platform test, but for the end-to-end scenarios, we want to make sure that the data stream is working correctly throughout all of the platforms.
Yeah, makes sense. This one seems kind of similar. Another question here. It's, do you build quick and dirty, or do you build for data-driven and reusable? So I guess that goes into your kind of your strategy around testing.
That is why we have peer review. Now we are 11 test engineers working on the same solution, and you can say everybody is working with the same strategy, the same mindset about we are building as much reusable as possible. Because as I said, when we was also speaking about the end goal, is that it's easy to deliver 100 test cases that is just built and will perhaps persist for half a year, and then they will be drowned up in maintainability. What we want is that to maximize the reusability. Now I'm from Denmark, and I really like to speak into Lego pieces, is that building it into minor fragments, Lego pieces, we can just plug and play in between. So that we can utilize them for all the other platforms. So if I build one with a specific purpose, it can be reused across all of the other platforms as well if they need to have that inside of the test.
So you always have scalability in mind, in other words, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another question for you, Nicki, and I'm not sure if you have the exact number, but maybe just a ballpark. It says, what percentage would you say of your Salesforce applications is Lightning Web Components?
Oh, then I have to catch up with an architect. That was some of a question, but I'm really not sure on that question how to answer it in percentage. We are using quite a lot of Lightning Web Components, but it's not everything that is transitioned yet. I think that's the best knowledge I got on that part.
Yeah, maybe a follow up there. Another question, Nicki. Can you share how Provar has helped you fill the gaps, as you mentioned, and not just doing regression testing?
Where they helped us fill the gaps is that there was a lot of risk when you're having both this about agile teams. Agile teams is having some sort of a contract-based contract where they say, I cover the process from this part to this, you cover it from the next, and so on. Suddenly we could have those end-to-end testing all in between, because normally what we saw was that it was the gaps in between those processes that was failing. And then coming back to that about just understanding how to implement it and not risking that some of the processes not being tested properly, because nobody really knows who got the responsibility for it. Suddenly we could test all of the integrations also towards our partnerships. One of the growing businesses from our perspective is partnerships. And that means we also have a lot of responsibility towards them about how the process are being delivered each single time. But we cannot go to the partner and ask them to say, okay, can you guys test for us? So by using Provar, we could utilize that tool to act as the vendor or the partner or whatever it should be, and see how our system will respond to it.
Right. Yeah, I follow. We had another question. This was, what number of testers do you have to implement and maintain what you've created with Provar?
So far, we got 11 technical testers, 7 seniors, and 2 in training, and 2 students.
Okay, short and sweet. Looks like there's a question here for me. It's what would the transition look like for an advanced automation SDET team from an existing homegrown framework to Provar? I would say a phased approach. Typically, we've seen a lot of people that are coming from Selenium-based frameworks or other open source-based frameworks where they have a lot of test automation engineers. And you may be bringing in a lot of legacy functionality and a lot of test cases into something like Provar. It's best to always start with the highest impact items. So don't start automating things that are not that high of a risk in your organization, right? You want to start with things that are going to have the biggest impact on your business, and definitely tackle it in phases. It's okay to have both running in parallel as long as they're both providing value. And as long as you're showing kind of a gradual migration to eventually sunset what you've built internally. But alongside with that, we do have resources internally and other vendors and partners that we collaborate with to kind of help guide you through that process as well. So great question there. Here's a good question. Nicki, for you, do you face challenges with maintenance?
No, I will not say so. I would say one of the things we have seen is that when we was equal to one-to-one with the team you was sitting in, so then it was actually quite easy to maintain. And I will say, if you're doing proper, if you're building with a good enough strategy where you're putting all of it into Lego pieces, so to speak, so that whenever you have to do a change, you're doing it once instead of having to doing it 60 times. That can decrease the maintainability quite a lot. That's what we have learned, both the hard way to start with, but also understanding how to do it better and better over time. Because you can say at some point, we was, again, 2 technical testers on the entire Salesforce platform, maintaining the entire solution. So we had to all the time thinking this about maintainability, because we simply didn't have more resources at that given time. So to answer that question, I will say so far we haven't experienced a big problem about maintainability. Now it's just getting bigger and bigger. So then it's also, again, it's a cost for the company if they want to keep on going and scaling up. And now where they have made that decision, it's just an ongoing factor.
Right. We have time for a couple more questions here, and we may not have time to get to all the questions. We're doing our best, however. We had another question. This one's for you, Nicki. This is a great question. And it was, can you share your experience around managing scripts that run in parallel? So have you dealt with any kind of issues in terms of sequential test cases, tests that would depend on kind of the previous result in the future? And what were some best practices that you would recommend for making a script be more efficient and for speeding up execution times?
You can say what we did was that because of the way we could manage data inside of our test, we could set it up, we could tear it down. One of the decisions we made from the start of by our architect was that saying all our test cases should be independent as far as we could. So you can say by doing all of your test cases independent on each other, you will not have the same risk of running all of those in parallel, because they will simply be running on their own instance. So what we did when we was presenting back in 2019 was that showing, I think it was an image Nikolai was bringing along, where we had, I think it was 11 or 13 parallel instances running. And that was actually not really causing any troubles. Because again, when they are living independently, you're not risking that they are hitting the same object or they are trying to do the same thing at the same time on the same customer and so on. So all of those is pretty much removed by doing that.
Right. Yeah. And again, I would just echo your statements there, Nicki, that building tests to be as modular and independent as possible helps whenever you get into parallelization, because then you're not reliant on tests executing in a certain order, or failing if the test before it fails and things like that. We had a question here, and maybe you could answer this one, Nicki, since you have a kind of a diverse team there. What's the typical role in a development team in an enterprise that can effectively deliver automation results on a daily basis with Provar?
Well, we have multiple roles doing that, you can say. We both have the more platform-like team who is delivering test automation, but we also made a decision about we are having our test engineers sitting inside of the teams, but assisting on the other areas, so that they are a part of a team maintaining a sort of areas. And then if they are done with their area, they can always move on to the next. So right now, I will say they can both sit as a team by themselves when you're doing it with an enterprise level in mind, but they can also be part of the different teams on the platform so that they have the proper understanding and expertise in the platform. I really see the pro and con in both of the scenarios. But for us, it's been quite an advance that having the teams on the specific platforms using even some of the business developers who is trying to adjust into test automation, that knowledge they can bring into the table is extremely valuable compared to what most of the technical testers can gain by themselves. So I also think it's a lot about the collaboration inside of the company to increase the knowledge to make the best possible test automation.
Yeah. So the short answer is pretty much anyone. As long as they're familiar with Salesforce or whatever you're testing, that definitely helps, I'd say.
Exactly.
This is the question, looks like for me. How does Provar help with UI performance testing in cases of custom solutions? So not talking specifically about load testing, but testing UI latency when page objects are pulling data as they render. This is a good question. There's loads of different types of testing that you can use Provar to accomplish. Some of the ones that Nicki's kind of walked through, integration testing for databases, APIs, testing, regression tests, functional testing, component-based testing, that kind of thing. Performance testing is more of a niche thing. We do have capabilities in Provar that you can attach different service, like basically SLAs to different tests and test scenarios, which can pull in all the data as far as the time it takes for certain pages and certain steps to execute. So there's different ways that you can generate a report from that as well. So that may be one way to go about it. We have another question here. It looks like this one is for you, Nicki, and apologize, may not be able to get to all these, but this is a good question here. It says, do you use test automation to validate the functionality of custom Lightning components created by your development team? We have components like dynamic forms where we have tons of different variations, how a form elements will be rendered dynamically according to a user's input. And they use manual testing for it. It requires a huge effort from their QA team.
I think yes. The answer is yes. We do have stuff like that. We also have embedded sales processes into Salesforce, which are non-related to Salesforce whatsoever, but is an extremely time-consuming process where everything inside of it is custom made. So you can say we have both of the scenarios. We both have a lot of the not so custom, but we also have those entirely custom sales processes built into it. And yes, we are using Provar for both the sales process and for all the custom functionalities we are building. And so far, I think what we have seen is that the more variations you get inside of the manual testing, the more reasons to automate it, basically.
Right.
So,
yeah, makes sense to me. Maybe one or two more questions and then we'll close it out. So this is maybe a question for both of us. I'll let you answer first, Nicki. What CI/CD platform would you recommend? Out of the 300 that exist, right? What would your...
That is quite a question. I don't really have an answer for that because I think there's pros and cons with like all of them. I think the way we are looking towards right now is either stuff like GitHub Actions, Asia Pipeline, or perhaps moving towards Provar Grid at some point.
Right, yeah. I would just say if you're talking about adopting a new platform, the best place to always look is internally first to see what your other teams may be using and what you may be able to utilize. If you already have something that is existing, like for example, if your development team's using GitHub, then use GitHub Actions, right? Makes sense. It would be a lot easier to adopt that internally and make wider usage of it and to integrate your test automation with something that's already being used versus trying to vet another solution and figure out how you can integrate that. So trying to limit the amount of applications or software that your team is using and standardize it, I think, is the best way to go about it. But, requirements are a big thing. Obviously, make sure that whatever you're looking into fits your requirements specifically. They all have different capabilities. They all have different users that they target. So that's something to consider as well. Okay, I'll do one more question here, Nicki. This is a good one. Do you maintain real time or when you're looking at kind of your sprint planning and your velocity, or do you maintain scripts after go live, after functionality is live?
Can you try repeat that question once more?
Yeah, I'm trying to interpret it. I think it's mainly around, do you build test cases for things that are being developed in sprint, so like in sprint automation, or are you more so testing things and building test cases after something has already been developed and pushed?
Both, depending on where you are with the team. You can say what we have prioritized is to say that we are automating all the Niva development first, and then we are slowly but steady getting the backlog of heavy processes we're automating. Like the scenario we spoke into before, where it was 58 hours reduced to 7 minutes. Next step was the putting on the commercial segment that will increase the manual testing to 116 hours, and we should be able to keep it around for 15 minutes is my bet when we're done. And that's all done in the development phase. My clearly expectation myself is that, and what I think is that it's easier to build by developing it than to try to get back into it and understand the entire process with the risk of the developer who built it or someone else who was managing it is not in the company anymore.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'll answer one or two more from my side just to be quick here, and then we'll close it out. So we had a question. Can you use Provar for the scenarios which involve the integration system testing like an ERP system? I think, Nicki, from your experience, the answer there would be yes, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, you probably just check that one off there. Short answer. We had a question around integrating Maven while using the Provar CLI and Ant. So Provar has two different components to it. It has the actual application itself, and then we have the command line interface that we use to integrate with pipelines and CI/CD. There's obviously multiple ways you could go about that. You could use the Ant version of the Provar CLI, and then we also have a Salesforce DX plugin called Provar DX, which can be used if you're using Salesforce development practices like that. So those are the two main ways that you can go about running your test cases in a pipeline. Anything that supports command line operations is something that can be integrated with. Short answer there. Okay, wow, we had a lot of questions, a lot of great questions come in. Apologies if I did not get to your question, but we're going to go ahead and close off the webinar for now, I think. We've got to a lot of different questions here. And thank you so much, Nicki, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Hope you enjoyed our webinar today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.